You heard of top 10 anime betrayals. Now we'll go over top 10 anime betrayals in World of Warcraft. Starting off at number 10, we have Maiev, everyone's favorite watcher and hunter of the most famous betrayer of Warcraft, Illidan, who won't appear on this list because he's more of a double agent than an actual betrayer, despite the fact that he's literally known as Illidan the Betrayer. If anything, the one who chased him down fits that title much more. Maiev was a Night Elf Sentinel who was in charge of watching Illidan for 10,000 years, before Tyrande broke into the prison, killed a bunch of her Sentinels, and freed him, so that he could help them fight the Legion. He did help and was eventually released to Outlands instead of being sent back to prison, so Maiev chased him and was eventually captured by Illidan. After Maiev is freed by a raiding party in Black Temple, she helps them kill Illidan, and then she imprisons his body. Later on, the Night Elf Society decides that they want to re-allow the Highborn Elves into their system, and with that comes the practicing of arcane magic, which was the same type of magic which led to the War of the Ancients with Azshara. Maiev was not a fan of this, and already didn't like Tyrande anyway, so she went around secretly killing the Highborn members who were being integrated back into their society, and eventually planned on killing Malfurion himself. You see, Maiev was kind of crazy. She hunted Illidan down with a fanatical devotion, and then when she was captured by him, Illidan tortured her. So eventually, Malfurion, thanks to the help of Maiev's brother, Jared's Shadowsong, they were able to find out it was Maiev doing the killings, tracked her down, and then defeated her in a final battle, where Jared eventually let her go since he couldn't bring himself to kill his sister. So then she went off to the Vault of the Wardens and then released all of the imprisoned demon hunters when the Legion invaded sometime later. She then ran after the Legion after they stole Illidan's body, and then was captured and placed in Blackrock Hold where she was rescued by her brother. And they just kind of never talked about what happened in the Wolfheart novel. They do mention it briefly. Maiev does apologize for trying to kill him, and then that's the end of it. And Maiev is a major player for the rest of the expansion and fights with Illidan of the Broken Isles against the Legion. This is kind of a weird one. Blizzard was obviously setting up Maiev as some kind of new bad guy, and her character would be very easy to turn into one, since she's always been kind of crazy ever since her introduction to Warcraft 3. But then, they decided not to go down that path, which is kind of odd, but most players don't know about the murder she committed, so I guess it's not that big of a deal, which is why this is only the number 10 spot on this list. And today's video is sponsored by Crunchyroll, which is very appropriate considering the fact this video idea was made based off of the top 10 anime betrayals meme. Now, in case you don't know what Crunchyroll is, it's the best place to watch anime on the internet, or on any device you might have. I currently watch it most of the time on my Kindle while I'm eating dinner, since I've been an active user of Crunchyroll for about 8 years now. So it's great that they reached out to me so that I could tell you to sign up under my special link, crunchyroll.com/hirumaredx, to gain a 2-week free trial of HD professionally subtitled anime, which goes up 1 hour after it goes live in Japan, especially the newest series that's come out, Tower of God. Now, if you want some juicy anime betrayals, I would definitely recommend this anime, especially since I've been reading Tower of God for the past 5 years, and I didn't think it would get an anime, so I really love that Crunchyroll brought it into existence. Of course, they have much more than just Tower of God. I'd also highly recommend Hunter x Hunter if you want a long-form, just masterpiece of an anime. In full HD 1080p on any mobile device you might have, by the way. If you're stuck with a whole bunch of free time, just make sure to sign up under my link, crunchyroll.com/hirumaredx, to start your 2-week free trial today. And at number 9, we have Shadow-Sage Iskar. You first meet Shadow Lord Iskar in the Spires of Arrakis, where you learn about the history of his people, and that he's a cursed Arakoa who had his wings clipped and was thrown into the blood of Seath. You learn that he had a sister in the Arakoa Society, or a brood sister, who was very curious about the past of the Arakoa and would constantly read history books to find out what really happened. Iskar was asked by his tribal leader to spy on his sister and report back to them, as she was too close to learning something she wasn't supposed to know. Iskar himself told her many times to cut it out and to stop trying to pry into the past, but she wouldn't listen, and eventually she found the answer she was looking for. A past king that they were told was a tyrant was actually a pretty cool and chill dude, and the current leadership had overthrown him and changed history to retroactively paint him in a much harsher light to give their new rule more legitimacy. Upon learning this, she told Iskar about it, and then she decided to burn the evidence as she didn't want anyone else to find out. as she actually liked her current life and didn't want it to change, and this information would change everything. But Iskar thought everybody should know, and tried to fight her for the scrolls, but she eventually overpowered him and was able to burn them. It turns out the tribal leader had been spying on them during this interaction, and put them both in prison. But they liked how the sister was willing to cover up the past after she found out about it, and they didn't like how Iskar reacted to it. So they gave her the choice to clip his wings and banish him, and she took them up on the offer, and eventually became the new leader of their civilization many years later. While Iskar rose to the top of the broken Arakoa society, known as the Outcasts. So in the Spies of Iraq, you help Iskar take down his sister, which all culminates in a battle in the Skyreach dungeon, where you kill her as the final boss. But then Gul'dan comes in and offers Iskar the blood of the Legion, which he promises will fix his wings and allow him to fly again. And he decides to betray his people to join the Legion, so that he can gain the ability to fly once more. And then he convinces a whole bunch of his other people to come with him, trading one curse for another, and that's why you have to fight him in a boss in the Hellfire Citadel raid. Iskar was betrayed by his sister, eventually overthrew her rule, and then went out and betrayed the remainder of the Arakoa to the Legion. And at number 8, we have Loken's betrayal. Loken betrayed all of the Titan Keepers and almost unleashed Yogg-Saron upon the world. You see, the Titan Keepers were created in order to fight the Old Gods, and then after they won their battle, their job was to watch over the planet and to keep the Old Gods in prison. Yogg-Saron tried very hard to corrupt Loken since he had direct access to the Forge of Wills, which allowed him to create new Titan constructs. But Loken was pretty much immune to Yogg-Saron's whispers. But luckily for Yogg-Saron, he could just use good old-fashioned regular manipulation instead of Old God manipulation, as Loken was secretly having an affair with Sif, who was the wife of another of the Titan Keepers, Thorim. So Yogg subtly convinced him to go all in with Sif, and that they didn't need to hide their secret relationship. But Sif told Loken that wasn't a good idea, and that it could possibly start a civil war within the Titan Keepers. So in a fit of rage, Loken killed Sif, and immediately regretted his decision. Luckily, the soul of Sif appeared before him and told him that she forgave his little blunder, but they would need to cover up her death very quickly, otherwise a war might break out. This wasn't the actual spirit of Sif though, and was Yogg-Saron sending an illusion to him, telling him things he wanted to hear, as well as finally having a direct line to manipulate Loken with. So Loken blamed the death on the Frost Giants, which caused Thorim to start a war with him. And then afterwards, Loken convinced Thorim that he acted way too rashly with the Frost Giants, and he should be ashamed of himself, which Thorim agreed to, and imposed himself in self-exile. Loken then eventually found out that the Sif Ghost was actually an illusion created by Yogg-Saron, and he became obsessed with covering up his mistake. So he went about plotting the downfall of all the other Titan Keepers. That way, when Algalon returned to check up on them, he could tell them everything was fine, and no Old God corruption had seeped through. Even though Yogg-Saron had already corrupted the Forge of Wills by this point, and inflicted the Curse of Flesh on the world. So Loken went to Helia and convinced her to lock Odin in the Halls of Valor, which allowed him to name himself the Prime Designate. Then he orchestrated an accident to happen in Mimiron's workshop, which almost killed him and took him out of commission for years while his mechagnomes rebuilt him. He also ambushed Freya and then locked her in a garden in Ulduar. He created a group of fire giants to attack Hodir, which caused the remaining 2 Titan Keepers to go into hiding. And then he went and checked on Ra'dan, who was away in the south, only to find out that he had already gone missing. So with all of the Titan Keepers taken care of, he tentatively watched and ruled everything, while Yogg-Saron went about his business unimpeded, until eventually Loken is disposed of by a group of adventurers. But with his death, a warning signal was sent out to Algalon, who came to the planet and almost initiated the restart sequence, which would have killed all the life on the planet. This was eventually stopped though, and Yogg was pushed back into his prison, and all the living Titan Keepers were freed of Loken's tyranny. And at number 7, we have Sargeras. Sargeras the Titan betrayed the Pantheon, killed them all, and then held their souls captive for thousands of years. Sargeras was the ultimate warrior in the Pantheon of the Titans, a super powerful race of beings who were born from planets, and Sargeras was in charge of fighting the demons. Eventually, Sargeras came across a world that was corrupted by the Void, and plucked out one of the demons who was already using the Void and asked them what was going on. And through this, he learned about the Void Lords, and how they were trying to corrupt a Titan so they could use it as a vessel to come into this realm of existence. And the power of the Void was so great that it scared Sargeras, and he thought there was no way they could possibly win if a Void Lord succeeded in their plans. So he cut the planet in half to stop it from corrupting the Titan which was growing inside of it. and then he went to the Pantheon to tell them what was going on. He told them that the only way they could possibly stop the Void Lords was if they destroyed all life in the universe. That way they could watch as this new life sprung into existence, and would be better able to contain the Void. So, for some reason though, the rest of the Pantheon didn't exactly like this proposed idea, and decided to try their own ways of trying to deal with the Void. So they went out and eventually found a planet called Azeroth, which was also infected with the Void problem, managed to fix it up, went back to whatever hangout they were at, and were killed by Sargeras, who then collected all of their souls and tried to turn them to his side. And eventually, a group of adventurers were able to go in and free all the Titans, who were then able to capture Sargeras and imprison him instead. And at number 6, we have Deathwing. Deathwing was one of the original 5 dragon aspects, and during the War of the Ancients, when the Legion was invading Azeroth, Deathwing came to the other 4 aspects of the solution to their problem. They could create something known as the Dragon Soul, which would allow them to reverse the portal in the Well of Eternity and literally suck all of the demons out of the planet like a super precise vacuum. But he was going to need a portion of all of the aspects' powers in order to do so. So they all agreed, and Deathwing was able to create the Dragon Soul. And then he took it to the Well of Eternity, and then immediately betrayed everyone. He was able to use the Dragon Soul in order to freeze all of the other dragon aspects in place, so that they couldn't fight back. And he also killed hordes of night elves and demons, and nearly the entirety of the Blue Dragon flight when Malygos tried to stage a counterattack. Eventually, one of the red dragons was able to distract Deathwing long enough for a whole bunch of other dragons to rush him and then chase him off. And then a small group was able to sneak into Deathwing's base and grab the Dragon Soul, and bring it back to the Well of Eternity in order to do exactly what Deathwing had originally advertised, which worked a little bit too well and caused the world to split apart. Deathwing had been corrupted by the old gods, as he was very susceptible to the corruption since he was the aspect of Earth, and was kind of a reoccurring villain throughout Warcraft's history until he was defeated in the Cataclysm. And his betrayal of the dragon aspects caused Malygos to go insane, which eventually turned him into a bad guy as well, who was killed in the Wrath of the Lich King expansion. And at number 5, we have Aiden Perenolde. During the Second War, the orcs were kind of ravaging through the northern kingdoms, and were doing a very good job at winning. So when they needed to pass through the Alterac Mountains in order to get to Capital City, Aiden Perenolde, or more commonly known as Lord Perenolde, met with the Horde leaders himself, and offered them free passage through the mountains unimpeded if they simply promised to leave him and his people alone. Orgrim Doomhammer, the leader of the Horde at the time, was very cautious of Lord Perenolde, but took him up on his offer anyway. And it was thanks to this betrayal that the Horde was able to get to Capital City before they were able to prop up a proper defense, in preparation of a siege. After Lordaeron was able to win the battle with the Horde and push them back to Blackrock Mountain, they took over Perenolde's lands and put him on house arrest. Since he was a king, they couldn't actually try him for any crimes, imprison him, or execute him. So they urged him to give up his title so that he would be demoted to a lesser noble. He refused to do this, however, and was able to secretly come up with a plan to make a bargain with whatever was left of the Horde troops, to attack the Alliance troops who were in his land so that he could free himself from them. Deathwing himself attacked the barracks holding the troops, who was also involved in this. A lot of things happened in the Second War. And after this event happened, Perenolde was officially declared a traitor. His people were exiled from their lands, and a warrant was placed on his head. He eventually died at some point. We don't actually know what happened to him. And funny enough, Aiden Perenolde is the only human king from the Second War who is not depicted in any Warcraft game, and also never makes an appearance in World of Warcraft. He's so hated as a traitor that they don't even show him in flashbacks, which is kind of funny. And at number 4, we have Sicco Thermaplugg, whose betrayal killed more than half of the gnomes in Gnomeregan. Sicco was a high-ranking gnome who wanted the job of High Tinker, which was the highest position in gnomish society. But his close friend, Gul'dan Mekator, got the job instead, and he was forever secretly bitter about this. So after many years, he came up with a plan in order to make Gul'dan Mekator look incompetent. A horde of Trogs started attacking the city of Gnomeregan, and Sicco came up with a plan for Mekator in order to deal with this problem. He had this special gas, which he said would only work on the Trogs, and if pumped into the central airing system, would immediately get rid of all of them, and leave all of the gnomes completely safe. And since Mekator was good friends with him, he trusted him that his plan would work. So he put the gas into action, and it didn't quite go as planned. Sicco had planned on the gas killing about 30% of the gnomes, but also solving the Trog problem. and he had also planned on blaming everything on Mekatorg, which would get him stripped of his title, and since Thermaplugg was second in command, he would get the High Tinker position by default. But the gas actually killed about 80% of the gnomes instead, and didn't actually kill all of the Trogs. The radiation also affected Thermaplugg himself, and he went even more mad due to the radiation, and turned into a leper gnome. The surviving gnomes were forced to leave their city, and were taken in by the dwarves. And then afterwards, they tried many times throughout the years to try to take the city back from their crazed Thermaplugg, but he successfully pushed them back many times, and kept the city well guarded with his inventions, and the Trogs that he eventually learned how to control. Eventually though, Mekatorg was able to finally kill Thermaplugg. You see, Mekatorg went back into the city for another attempt at taking it back, and fell for one of Thermaplugg's traps, and was able to just outthink him and turn his traps against him, causing Thermaplugg to cut himself in half. Mekatorg then left him for dead, and we don't really have confirmation if Thermaplugg actually died or not. But in BFA, during the Gnomish Heritage Armor quest, a follower of Thermaplugg will attack the players as well as the gnomes in retaliation for the death of Thermaplugg, which is some of the only confirmation we have that he probably did die when he was cut in half. But seeing as this is Warcraft, that doesn't necessarily mean he's dead. I won't believe it until we see him in the Shadowlands or something. And at number 3, we have Dar'khan, who betrayed all of the Blood Elves to Arthas. Dar'khan was a High Elf of Silvermoon, and when Arthas was trying to siege Silvermoon so that he could use the Sunwell to bring Kel'Thuzad back to life, he was actually having a very hard time taking the city because of all of their magical defenses. So one day, Dar'khan just kind of goes up to Arthas and asked him if he wants to know all of the secrets to their magical defenses surrounding the city. And Arthas was like, yeah, of course I do. So Dar'khan gave him all of the secrets and even helped him invade at certain points, all under the promise of more power or something. It was more of a temporary measure, as Dar'khan had planned on betraying Arthas himself once he had conquered the city. Although he immediately got killed by Arthas when he tried to betray him, and then was raised as an undead and forced to work for him instead. And if it wasn't for Dar'khan betraying the Blood Elves, Arthas might have never been able to take the city, and Sylvanas would probably still be alive to this day. This is one of the more famous betrayals in Warcraft, and why it definitely has to take a high spot on this list. And at number 2, we have Original Timeline Gul'dan. Gul'dan's betrayal was so bad that it was the reason the Horde lost the Second War. Now, some context. The Horde won the First War and took over Stormwind City, but afterwards Orgrim took out the Shadow Council and Gul'dan, but when Gul'dan woke up, he was able to convince Orgrim not to kill him, because he could prove himself very useful. Basically, Gul'dan created the first Death Knights by implanting the souls of his dead Shadow Council members into the bodies of fallen human knights. So Orgrim begrudgingly allowed Gul'dan to stay in the Horde, because his Death Knights were pretty dope. They also had the Dragon Riders, thanks to a clan of the Horde successfully taking over Alexstrasza and forcing her to breed mounts for them. Orgrim was also able to successfully recruit Zul'jin and his forest trolls into his ranks, with the promise of giving them Silvermoon City. And Zul'jin was like the strongest troll of all time, basically. That's why they included him in Heroes of the Storm before more famous trolls like Vol'jin. So Orgrim was winning pretty much every single battle and had Capital City in siege, where it was only a matter of time before he would take Lordaeron. You know, thanks to the betrayal with Aiden Perenolde. And he had left Gul'dan in charge of disabling the Silvermoon defenses so that that section of the Horde and the forest trolls could eventually take the city. But Gul'dan had different plans. He instead used this opportunity to take some of the runes that Silvermoon was using as a defensive barrier, and then converted them into a machine which allowed him to create two-headed ogres. And then he used his new army of spellcasters to go into the middle of the sea to raise the Broken Isles, defeated most of the Kulturon navy on the way there, and eventually died inside the tomb of Sargeras. But after Orgrim learned of Gul'dan's betrayal, he basically immediately stopped his siege on Capital City, turned half his army around and told them to go back and get him. The Alliance was very puzzled by this, but Orgrim had promised him that he would kill him himself if he ever betrayed him, and he was not going to go back on his word no matter what. Although Orgrim never did make it to Gul'dan before he was killed inside the tomb, and it was Gul'dan's betrayal that allowed the Alliance to regroup and bolster their defenses, and eventually push them all the way back to Blackrock Mountain, where they are eventually able to win the war and capture all of the orcs. But if Gul'dan had never betrayed the Horde, if he had just waited for them to win first, Orgrim would have taken Lordaeron eventually, and they probably would have taken the rest of the world afterwards. They were a very efficient army, and the Alliance was not organized enough to mount a proper counterattack. But they got lucky that Gul'dan screwed everything up for them. The Alliance should probably thank Gul'dan for being the biggest single asset to the Alliance's victory in the Second War. And at number 1, we have Putress and Varimathras, causing the Wrathgate incident. This act of betrayal is probably one of the most famous betrayals in the game, and leads to a fan-favorite cinematic, which was the first ever in-game cinematic as well, where during the Battle of Wrathgate, when the forces of the Alliance and Horde were working together to battle the Lich King, they managed to drag the Lich King out of his citadel and fight him for the first time. But then Putress shows up with catapults full of plague that he had developed specifically to work on undead creatures, that was also very effective against living creatures as well, and launched them on the battlefield, killing both the Horde and Alliance, as well as whatever forces the Lich King had there too. The Lich King then retreated, and Sylvanas had to explain why her followers had betrayed everyone at the Wrathgate. Now, Sylvanas had definitely known about the creation of the plague, and had probably ordered its creation herself, but she was not behind the attack with Putress. It was actually Varimathras, her second in command, which was a dreadlord that she subjugated during the Third War. So both the Horde and Alliance players have to retake Undercity, which is controlled by Varimathras' faction, and you eventually kill him, and then you get to kill him again in Legion as he shows up as a raid boss in Antorus. Now, you see, all of this happens in the 3rd expansion of World of Warcraft. For the first 2 expansions, Varimathras is friendly to the Horde, and even has a couple of quests that he sends Horde players out to do for him. Putress himself is also an NPC that was added during the Scourge Invasion pre-launch event to Wrath of the Lich King, and worked on a way to stop the spread of the plague. He was then brought with Sylvanas to a meeting Thrall called to talk about the Northrend campaign to kill the Lich King, and Sylvanas told Thrall that he would be a very valuable asset to the campaign. So it was quite the shock when the Wrathgate betrayal happened, which was then swiftly dealt with in the Battle of Undercity. Now, even if this betrayal wasn't really on the same scale as something like Gul'dan single-handedly losing them the war, it is the most famous betrayal in the game, which is why it has to take the number 1 spot. Because I'm sure most people don't even know what happened in the Second War. That doesn't really get talked about very much in World of Warcraft. Alright, and that's the list. Turns out Warcraft has lots of betrayals in it, but that's because it's a very long and expansive story. It has tons and tons of characters, so that kind of makes sense that there's so many of them. I'd like to thank the Flying Buttress for editing this video together. If you like his work, make sure you check out his channel, which will be linked at the end of this video in the video description.